We are beginning, we have begun Masechet Rosh Hashanah. It's a change of pace a little bit from Masechet Beitzah. Masechet Rosh Hashanah deals with Rosh Hashanah as we know it, the holiday that just passed a little over a month ago, but also many other things. It's a rich and varied Masechet. So if you were with us for Masechet Beitzah, where we really dug in about a specific topic of labors that we can do on holidays that we can't do on Shabbat, and why and how and so on and so forth, which was a month of Masechet Beitzah. Some people love that. If that wasn't varied enough for you, you're in for some happy times in Rosh Hashanah, because each chapter has its own theme. Some are about the Rosh Hashanah that we know and love, and some of the themes are about other things as well. And you'll get, it's a lovely Masechet, and I'm looking forward to reading it. Today's presentation, thank you Sesame Street and my borrowing without permission your photo of the count, is brought to you by the number 4, because that's how Masechet Rosh Hashanah starts out. Wait a minute, you might say, if you read the first Mishnah, how many Rosh Hashanahs are there? Because the first Mishnah, which is now on your screen, says there are 4 days in the year that serve as a new year. And I'm not going to read through the screen. If you've read Daf Yomi, you've seen the Mishnah. You could look at the screen on your own to see the different things here. I want us to jump out of the little text to think about how this notion that the rabbis have, that there are lots of different New Years, that when you start to read Masechet Rosh Hashanah, sometimes seems foreign, is not actually not so foreign to us. So here's the challenge question. I want to ask you to think about, not in Jewish culture, but in our general culture in which we live, what are the different kinds of New Years that we celebrate? And if you can think of some, you could just put it into chat. So I'll give you an example to say what I mean. I'm doing a little work in a school this fall, and I know that just about a month ago around Labor Day, we started the school year, and we had a new school year. Thank you, Joshua said the fiscal year. So let's see what we can generate in the text. Think about the different kinds of New Years that you mark. All right. Ooh, Chinese New Year. Different cultures have different New Years. Sports seasons. Right, as a Cubs fan, I could say it's now football season because we're not in the baseball season anymore. And I'm a Steelers fan, so I'm about to say it's basketball season because we're not starting off so well. I get that. Anybody else? All right, taxes. So schools and academic life are in a different year. Businesses have fiscal years, or the tax year could be different. Ooh, we have flu season years. Like that virus is on everybody's mind. Ooh, food. Interesting. Grand Slam in certain sports has a sequence in certain orders. Nice, Janine. Right, the rabbis talk about holiday years, right? The holidays start with Pesach in the Jewish calendar, and a cycle of holidays starts somewhere. There's the same thing sometimes with like Grand Slam in golf and tennis. Ooh, medical residency, I like that. Summer season at camp. Oh, Lori Stark, a former camp director, right? How many days till camp starts? We have a poster in our house. People count down to the beginning of the camp year. Oh, TV seasons, I like that. All right, you got a sense of that. Tu B'Shvat, that's one of ours. The New Year for trees, that's one of the ones from our Mishnah. So nice. So you have a sense of the different kinds of New Years. Appreciate people who added a comment to the chat. The rabbis lay out in the Mishnah different kinds of years, right? New Year's for kings and festivals begin in Nisan. And if you dig into the Gemara, you know when we say, right, this happened in the 5th year of the reign of King David, right? When does a year of a king start? On the 1st of Nisan, which means if the king begins to serve as king on a date, whatever date they serve on, whenever they get to the 1st of Nisan, they start the 2nd year of their rule. So their first year, unless it actually starts on the 1st of Nisan, is a fraction. And we see some other agricultural topics and other related things on the list. I want to give you a sense. It's interesting. Oh, I don't know if people are still jotting in the chat. I closed my chat so I could see the screen for a second. I didn't see anyone put this unless you put it since then, but do we have any horse lovers in the group? I want us to think about when we think about like the new year for trees or the new year for crops or the new year for animals. It's similar to the way we think about horses. Oh, I saw a few hands. Now I lost them. I was going to call on one of those hands, but it went off my screen. Does one of our horse lovers want to unmute and tell us when do horses celebrate their birthday?
Noah?
Well, thoroughbreds, that's not all horses. Thoroughbreds is January 1st.
Ah, nice. All right, thank you, Noah. And in fact, that is true, and you are Northern Hemisphere centric. Oh, sorry, my presentation is jumping too far. In the Northern Hemisphere, right, thoroughbred horses, their birthday is January 1st, and in the Southern Hemisphere, August 1st. And the reason why horses all have the same birthday is similar to the agricultural New Year's that we saw on the list from the Mishnah. If you're a lover of horse racing, or you know that, right, the Kentucky Derby is 3-year-old horses. So horses don't mark their birthday based on the actual day they were born like people do. Horses mark their birthday based on the seasons in which horses were born. So horses, thoroughbreds in the Northern Hemisphere, on January 1st, all horses who were born in the previous calendar year become 2. So when they say in the Kentucky Derby, we have 3-year-old horses, right? That means all the horses who race in a particular Kentucky Derby were born in the same season, but not necessarily on the same day. And you could have a whole range of specific ages because some horses could be earlier in the season and some later in the season. And some of the logic, I think, is, right, while we keep track of individual people in our lives and their specific birthdays, if you're a horse breeder, or if you're a shepherd and you have sheep and you have to figure out how to tithe your sheep for the temple, it's hard to keep track of the individual birthday of each specific animal under your care, especially in the days of the rabbis, which was before you could tag them with the computer chip and, just have it on your smartphone when all your sheep's birthday were. It was easier to just say, all the new sheep on this day become year 2. And from that point forward, we're starting a new class of sheep and we lump them together. So we do this with horses. It's a kind of year we have for horses. And that sort of gives you a sense of the agricultural New Year's and things that were mentioned in this first Mishnah that we'll dig into later. So in the opening pages of Masachet Rosh Hashanah, they start to dig into years for the cycle of a year for years and for kings, and you'll see the details. But as we go through this chapter, we'll tap into each of these calendars, and the rabbis will start to think about why it is we have the specific calendar, how we know when it starts, and what the specific details that it connects to. If you've been reading, you'll know that the question about the year of holidays, why do we need to know when a cycle of holidays starts? It has to do with not actually the celebration of holidays, but it has to do with vows. If someone vows, I vow to clean up my room before the year is over. People with teenagers might think that, that's a familiar vow. Well, you have a year's worth of the cycle of holidays, and there's a debate. Does it start with the particular holiday that's coming next, or does it start at the beginning of a cycle of holidays? The rabbis have different opinions about that, and we'll dig into those details as we go forward. But as I said earlier, 2 slides before, this presentation is brought to you by the number 4. So I'm going to shift gears for another highlight to a different 4 that we see. That lets us think about something different about both language, and I think about this a lot, thinking about Dvar Torah. The Hebrew word ki, which kaf yud, which appears all over the Torah, is a small little word that's mostly a preposition. I think sometimes it could function as an article. Reish Lakish, one of the rabbis in the Talmud, teaches us there are 4 ways that the word ki is used in the Torah. Sometimes it means if, sometimes it means perhaps, sometimes it means but, and sometimes it means because. And so I picked up on this because it's a theme of 4 that we see in this first parak, like 4 Rosh Hashanahs. But it led me to think of a few things. First, the rabbis were really sensitive to biblical Hebrew, and they knew that one small, simple word could mean lots of different things. And part of understanding a particular verse in the Torah is about making sure you identify the right one. And sometimes the rabbis even debate when the word key shows up, if it's the but key or the if key. And depending on which it is, it might totally change the meaning of a verse and its implication for moving forward. And I think about this a lot in terms of reading Daf Yomi. And while I'm reading Daf Yomi from the Koren Steinsaltz English edition, which has both the original text of the Torah and, the original text of the Talmud in Hebrew and Aramaic, and a running commentary in English. And depending on the day or the week, while I try to glance at the text as much as possible in the original language, I do use the translation a lot, just because, if you're in Daf Yomi, it's both a marathon and a sprint. And some days I need to follow it there, but it makes me think about the limits of translation. That when we're reading from a translation, you could have a particular word key that could have, it's a very simple word. It's not one that we often focus on because it's not really a concept word. Like, what does Rosh Hashanah mean in the Mishnah? We might talk about now, but what does this small 2-letter word that shows up all the time mean? It could mean 4 things that have a really different nuance and a really different explanation. I mean, as a teacher, when I'm translating a text for a lesson, it makes me think very carefully about how I provide that translation. And when I'm using translations, it makes me think a lot about, there are multiple ways that you could render a rabbinic text into an English language. And sometimes you don't think about these small words as being so important. But Reish Lakish reminds us on page 3a that they are, because the word key could mean 4 different things. And sometimes when we stumble upon it, you got to figure out which is the right one. Something to think about. And from time to time, if you're a reader of the Daily Dose of Talmud blog, my colleagues and I sometimes pick up on an issue in the Gemara. Here's a word that if we translate it one way, the whole Talmud means one thing, and if we translate it a different way, it means something else. So be sensitive, the same way you should be sensitive to just the concepts themselves. Even the words you're not likely to look at might be keys to understanding, key, no pun intended, to understanding the sugya ahead. That's highlight number 2. Highlight number 3, which we'll tap into. This is a highlight from the page 5 now, but we'll foreshadow some things we're going to get into in a later chapter. Rav Shemaiah teaches that the holiday of Shavuot sometimes, apologies for the extra space, occurs on the 5th day of Sivan, sometimes on the 6th day of Sivan, and sometimes on the 7th day of Sivan. Sorry, there are only 3 options here. I wish there was a 4th, but I put this into my brought to you by the number 4 anyways. I hope you'll forgive me that there are only 3. It's interesting to note, the holiday of Shavuot is the holiday in the Torah that doesn't come with a date, right? The Torah tells us Yom Kippur is the 10th of Tishrei, and it tells us that Pesach is on the 15th of Nisan. It tells us that Shavuot starts 50 days, after you bring the Omer, which happens at the beginning of Passover. And because of that, in rabbinic times, and especially when the date and new months were set by the testimony of witnesses and not by a fixed calendar, you didn't know how long the month of Nisan or the month of Sivan would be. Sorry, the month of Nisan or the month of Iyar would be. So when you started counting the Omer in the middle of Pesach and you counted 50 days, sometimes if both Nisan and Iyar were 29 days, Shavuot would start on the 5th of Sivan. And if Nisan and Iyar had one 30-day month and one 29-day month, Shavuot would start on the 6th of Sivan. And if both of those months were 30 days, well, you know what? I did that backwards. If both of the months were short, pardon me, I just explained it backwards. If both of the months were 29 days, it would be, Shavuot would fall on the 7th. if one was 29 and one was 30, it would fall on the 6th. And if both of them were long, 30-day months, it would fall on the 5th. So it meant until the calendar was fixed, we couldn't say specifically when Shavuot would fall until witnesses came to testify about the new month of Nisan, and then later the new month of Iyar, and later right when Sivan was going to start, which meant there was an unfixed piece of the calendar. This is going to play into our discussion of Masechet Rosh Hashanah, because in talking about Rosh Hashanah and the year of holidays, the rabbis are going to dig deep into how witnesses came to testify that they saw the new moon, and that would fix the length of a month and would set up the calendar, and all of the potential complications that could arise if witnesses don't come on the right day, or if witnesses come with false testimony, or if different groups of rabbis or different groups of Jews have different opinions about what counts as the new moon or when actually the holidays should be. That's going to be a big theme coming forward. If you've been reading Daf Yomi up until now, you won't be surprised at this topic because we had hints of it in previous Masechtot. But as we talk about the new year and the calendar year that relates to holidays and the setting of the calendar, this is going to be a big issue coming forward. And on page 5, we had a hint of this topic about the fact that Shavuot can fall on 3 different days. I wish it was 4, but these are the 3 days. So we're just getting started in Masechet Rosh Hashanah. These are some of the things we're seeing at the beginning. I wanted to give you an overview of some of the broad topics as a way of giving you some highlights of the week, and I'm looking forward myself to digging in as we move forward and to study Masechet Rosh Hashanah with you. All right, I'm going to go back, open up my chat, and to see some comments came in along the way, but I want to pause and try to use our last 10 minutes or so to see if people have comments or questions about anything I shared or other things that you might be thinking about as you're studying Daf Yomi. You can, Janine says, would you talk some about Cyrus? Sure. Do you want to specify that question? Do you want to drill down a little bit? All right. The rabbis this week, actually in the Daily Dose of Talmud, I wrote about Cyrus this week, but sometimes because I'm writing, I'm a few weeks ahead, so I don't know if this piece has come out. Cyrus the Great was an emperor in the Persian Empire, which took over the Assyrian Empire. And Cyrus the Great is credited by the Bible as being the emperor who ended the Babylonian captivity, right? When the Assyrians came and conquered the land of Israel, destroyed the northern, I'm sorry. Yes, no, I have all my dates wrong. Let me go back. I'm back with you. Cyrus, Persian Empire, took over from the Babylonians. The Babylonians came, destroyed the temple, exiled people to Babylonia. Mostly the upper class of the Jewish community from Israel was moved to Babylonia. The Jewish community became centered in Babylonia for a couple of generations, and the Bible credits Cyrus the Great of ending the Babylonian captivity, allowing Jews to move back to the land of Israel, and allowing them to rebuild the second temple. And the rabbis in the beginning of Masechet Rosh Hashanah and other places too talk about, like, is Cyrus someone who should be applauded for his behavior, or as a foreign emperor, right? Is he a foreign king, which makes him other, and maybe he's not a good king. It's an interesting concept that because he was responsible for the return to Israel and the building of the temple, Cyrus is seen as a redeemer, and some of the rabbinic texts are uncomfortable with seeing a non-Jewish emperor in the role of redeemer, right? In terms of, I guess, the Jewish stereotyping, it's our stereotype, right? Our literary motif is foreign emperor bad, Jewish king good, but it turns out to not always be that simple. We have plenty of examples of kings in the Tanakh who are not good. And here we have an example of Cyrus who does things on behalf of the Jewish people. And so we see some things in the text about, as the rabbis are talking about the years for kings, they ask, does this dating system apply to non-Jewish kings as well? And then the conversation comes to talk about Cyrus, who was a Persian emperor who did some nice things for the Jewish community. And there's a lot of conversation about him. I see some of your comments in the text reflect some of the different thoughts about Cyrus in the Gemara. Anything else someone wants to ask about? Oh, Rob picked up on, right, it's not even maybe the PG-13 version, even more, right? On page 4A, right, there's a text that suggests that Cyrus, as an emperor, was intimate with his dogs, right? That's a text that right, starts with an assumption that, right, foreign emperors, foreign empires have immoral cultures. We have some time until we get there. When we get to Masechet Avodah Zarah, which is the Masechet where the rabbis explore what makes something idol worship, there's some really challenging texts in that Masechet, both in the Mishnah and the Talmud, where the rabbis in the Talmud have some seriously, from my perspective, some seriously problematic stereotypes about non-Jews and their practices. It happens to be intimate relations with animals sometimes as a theme in some of those texts. And it's really hard for me to read those texts like this one, like Cyrus, that was mentioned in the text, to say that, right, the knee-jerk reaction of the rabbis is to make assumptions about foreign neighbors and the cultures in which they come, say those are other and very different. Now, granted, we live in a very different time and age where the ways in which, especially here in North America, where I think most of us are from, where we live side by side with neighbors from other civilizations and religions in different ways, and the interactions are different from the rabbis, but we'll see some really difficult texts, and we got some hints of that in the text here on page 4 about Cyrus. Anybody else? I'm loving the comments in the text. Now that we're all used to learning online on Zoom, right? I'm used to following the discussion and the other discussion in the text. You guys are saying some wonderful things. Michael brings up the issues about, right, some issues with sacrifices and time periods that you have, right? We saw in some of the cycles of the year, certain kinds of sacrifices have some required dates, but they're sort of, this isn't what you mean by the word grace, I mean the same word in a different way. Sometimes there's a grace period, right? If you bring a sacrifice for a holiday and you're stuck in line at the temple, some of the offerings can be made a little later past the holiday. Sometimes when you make an oath to bring a sacrifice, you're supposed to have a certain amount of time to actually fulfill that oath. This comes up in our Masechet because sometimes the time that you have to do these different things are connected very much to the calendar. And questions arise about how do you fulfill your obligation to bring the sacrifice and what the time period for that is, and does it affect the status of the sacrifice if you're late, or does it affect the status of your vow, whether or not you've fulfilled it if you're late? There's some questions there about the sacrifices. And this connects also Mary Jane just connected this to your attitude about bringing sacrifices. And then also the conversation comes up about similar attitudes about giving charity, which actually connects to the Cyrus conversation. And now for me, plants it on page 4, which I think might have been yesterday. If you look at the Daily Dose of Talmud, people are interested in this notion about selfish purposes of giving charity, or a little more about Cyrus and weaving those together. That was actually my blog for the Daily Dose of Talmud, which went yesterday. I'm loving the depth of comments that people are typing in right now. It's so amazing that so many people are engaged in Daf Yomi and reading so deeply. I wish we had a half hour a day, or maybe a 2-hour block to talk about all of these things. But I'm so pleased we got to squeeze in this half hour. I'm glad you came to this space. I'm loving this online space to chat a little bit about Daf Yomi. I love that you were chatting. People were a little shy about asking the questions orally, so I hope I didn't lull you to sleep with my soothing voice. But it was great to see everybody. I hope you guys have a Shabbat Shalom, and we'll to be continued. I'll see you in a few weeks, and some tremendous colleagues are coming up. I'll give things back over to Julie.